Hello, boys and girls, and welcome back to the Aotearoa Whiskey Club's Whiskey 101 section. Today, we're actually going to talk a little bit about the American bourbons and mash bills, or recipes if you like, but basically they're referred to as mash bills. Now, to get different flavors in America, it's a little bit different than how they do it in Scotland, which we're going to talk about a little later on down the track. But today we're going to focus on American bourbons and whiskeys and such. So, the typical mash bill in America, and when I say typical, it's like a rule of thumb. It's called a 70-20-10. So you're going to have 70% of corn, maize, which is the base of all bourbon. If the word bourbon is on that bottle, rest assured, by definition, there is at least 51% corn in that mash bill. So back to 70-20-10. So you'll have 70% corn in that mash bill, 20% rye, and 10% malted barley. You're always going to need a little bit of malted barley in the American bourbons and whiskeys because there's a tricky little enzyme in there that helps with the fermentation process. So you're always going to see anywhere from 7-8% up to 12, sometimes 15% in that mash bill. Now, I say that's typical. Now, to alter the flavors a little bit, you can change that recipe drastically. Like you can drop it down to just 55% corn, a bit more heavy on the rye, which we'll call it like a heavy rye, something like Old Granddad, for example, Basil Hayden, one of my favorites, but they're a little bit more heavy on the rye, not just that normal 20%. It can be 25, 30, 35%, but again, you've always got to have that base of 51% minimum corn. Now, interestingly enough, you'll see things like Maker's Mark, and the reason that you'll like Maker's Mark and maybe not another bourbon is it's similar to the Pappy Van Winkle in that it has wheat instead of rye in the mash bill. So they'll take out the rye and put in wheat instead. So again, let's just go on the premise that it's 70-20-10, 70% corn, 20% wheat instead of rye. Now what that'll do, if you're drinking, let's say you're drinking a Willet, standard Willet, compared to the Maker's Mark, and when you drink that, you're going to notice the Maker's Mark is going to feel and taste a little softer, a little bit more nuttier maybe, as opposed to your Willet or your other standard bourbons. You're going to get a little bit more spicy pop to it because that rye will cast off a little bit more heat, a little bit more spice, as opposed to your wheat, which will cast off a little bit more of a softer, nuttier flavor texture. So as you can see, there from Buffalo Trace, that is your standard mash bill with rye. This is going to be a wheated bourbon from Heaven Hill, so you can clearly see exactly the same when they're made up. All look crystal clear, just like water. It's just when they go in that barrel, that's where your magic's going to happen. But like I say, in the States, different flavors, you can alter that mash bill a bit. You can have wheat added into it or stick with the traditional rye in the mash bill, but again, always 51%, a minimum of 51% corn. And then from there, you can kind of change it up a little bit. Now, there is something popular now, just before I finish up, that they do something called a 4-grain. There's a couple of different distilleries now that are doing 4 grains. In other words, they'll actually have all 4 in there. Your corn, your malted barley, wheat, and rye. Quite interesting. So that's it in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen. The different mash bills of how the bourbons and American whiskeys are set up. And that's how they get a lot of their different flavors and different textures, just swapping that mash bill or recipe up a little bit. Hope you enjoyed that. Stay tuned for more to come. Until then, ciao.